I'm Jeanette with Trade Hounds here at NEMA's annual meeting in Palm Beach with the Chief Economist for NEMA, Donald Leavens. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a wonderful week here. What are some of the insights from the big trends that you're seeing that you could share?
I think the biggest one is we're broad. It sounds we're electrical industry, but that's pretty broad, going from lighting and building systems to automation. It's everything that goes from the point of generation, and even within some of the generation equipment and components itself, all the way to the end user, all the way through those wires, through transmission and the like. So it's pretty broad when you consider all the uses for it. The economy, it's so broad, and our industry is so broad, and there are different market drivers for it. And so we're heavily into electrical construction. That's everything that's in this room and that goes into buildings. It is from systems, from lighting, from the wiring, from anything that transfers electricity in any form or controls electricity. Our member companies make that. And lately, the non-residential construction sector, which is the building, the commercial side and the building side, has been very weak. We came out of the shutdown and the COVID period where people aren't working in offices. We're doing e-commerce, so we don't need that level of concrete brick and mortar stores. And so we've really been in a flat line on non-residential construction, which is the bulk of where many of our products go. And then housing, it's also been very difficult because mortgage rates are high, home prices are high, availability is tough. And now, on top of everything else, the abundant jobs for young people emerging out of universities are not there. And so it's also dampening demand for housing. So the demand's high, the affordability is not. That's the problem. So that's one aspect of weaker. And then there's this other side that's tied to data center growth and to electrification, into that energy consumption. And so everything from the EV, electric vehicle, in many states, the laws on the books now are switching people out of natural gas for cooking and for heating and going to electrify in New York, for instance, and other northern states. And so there's this upswell demand for more power, more juice, and we don't have the transmission and the distribution of those transmissions, the long connection between generation at a distance and getting it to where it's needed locally, and the distribution is when you step it down, that power to that final user. That's where a lot of the growth is. And so anybody feeding into that, we heard yesterday from a woman from Florida Light and Power and Light, and about how there's a 3-year lag, a 3-year delay on availability of transformers. And we've got the hyperscalers in the data center world who are also clamoring to get transformers, and they have deep pockets compared to utilities. So so that's an exciting part, and that's a part of why people are so excited here is if you're feeding into that and you have an angle into that, then you're doing really well.
Yeah, what does that mean for the NEMA members? I mean, what kind of guidance do you give them as you look at all of this information and what they should do with it?
I think that's one of the reasons we did a study last year on looking at grid flexibility. We could see it coming. You can't build transmission and distribution overnight. There's a lot of permitting regulation required. So you're kind of stuck in the short term with what you have. And so how can we make the most of that? And we have the devices that can do that. We have digital infrastructure that can turn substations into digital substations that can monitor where power is used, take it to where you don't need it, and allow it to flow where it is needed, and regulate it in a way that an analog system couldn't do that. And we have advanced wire and cable that can carry much more power just by reconductoring. We don't have it. We can use the same footprint, but you can reconductor those lines. There's infrastructure involved and investment there, but this is how you can carry more power, work with what we have, and meet this soaring demand. first we have to define it, which is what our study did about the coming surge in demand for it's real, because we went through 20 years of flat demand for electricity because many of the companies in this room, particularly in the lighting and the motor areas, developed so many energy efficient products. And that's what drove down the demand for and kept it flat, despite the fact our GDP growth and there was organic growth in population and demographic. It was flat because we had all this great energy efficiency. A lot of that we got the most out of this first wave of energy efficiency. Now we're looking at other ways. So it's really an exciting time for all of our members here. But it has implications for who's doing well and for diversification of their business and also for quality. Because one of the things that we stand for here is safety, standards for quality. And that's what makes, it's a mixed market where there's a lot of imports that are coming in for many of these products, but our organization works very hard on standards and quality. And that's one of the things our data center customers are demanding. Is we heard yesterday, in fact, that many of the data center folks are having to buy 2 components of everything. They have to be 24/7. Nothing can go down. So their ask for us yesterday from the hyperscalers can you make your equipment even more robust than it is, so we don't have to duplicate. It's twice the costs to build these, just because we have to have that redundancy.
What are some of the big topics that you're focusing on as you're looking forecasting into the future? Some of the things that I know these meetings, we talk a lot about, like what's coming next and how can we prepare? So like maybe pick like one of the big forecasts that you have that you are really excited about.
I think what we've found is in this study that we conducted last year and really released this year, but it was almost a year ago, and looking at the demand for power and looking at what EVs and data centers are going to consume and what the implication was. A lot has changed, and now we're going back and revisiting the forecast, and so we're building models from scratch internally, and so I'm excited about that. And some of the AI tools that are available for modeling and for computing today are making it. It's amazing what we can do now internally. So I'm excited to share that and show, because one of the things that was surprising in our study was that AI. We had that in our forecast. We knew AI data centers were growing, but what was undercounted was the extent to which we'd have this frontier training for large language models, and there'd be so many large language models competing I showed a chart this morning when I was discussing with the board and sharing my forecast on the demand for electricity from data centers, and AI alone by 2030, in just 4 years, will consume as much power as data centers consumed just 2 years ago. Just the data centers themselves, just the AI portion of energy demand will equal data center demand in 2023. So these are huge numbers, and this is why we're seeing hundreds of billions of dollars in investment committed, almost $1 trillion of investment committed. This is, we're to the point of all the money and all the time it took to put our U.S. highway system into place, the federal highway. We're vastly exceeding that. And when you think about these railroad projects, way ahead of this, and even in terms of inflation-adjusted investments here. So these are going to be very exciting times, and to stay on top of it. One thing everybody wants to know is, because we saw it in 2000, there was overinvestment in fiber cable, and everybody's asking, is this real? Is this going to last? And how long? What's going to happen? And so it's very exciting times to get a grip on that.
What do you think? Is it a bubble or a boom?
I think one thing, I've talked to a lot of people who are very close to it. One thing, and they always say this time is different, and that's, my ears perk up when I hear this time is a difference, because as an economist, no, things tend to repeat, and it's very few unique. But one thing that is different than what we saw in 2000 is there were so many of the startups and so many people gambling on leveraged money. Here, there's deep pockets with deep cash. When you look at what the combined Mag 7 companies have and can commit to this, the fear of them going under, no, they've got a lot. And so that's sustainable. How long is it sustainable? What's that technology? We had a little bit of a pullback with, I don't know if you're familiar, but with the DeepSeek algorithm that they were developing in China that was able to replicate everything that ChatGPT could do with much less training. And so there they thought, well, then you won't need as much power, and you won't need. So we had utility stock prices were dented by that, and all this influx of capital was like, whoa, are we making a wrong bet? Is it really going to be easier to do than what we thought? So there's always that. As it turned out, as we find that when things become less costly, people use more of them, and so you wind up with even potentially greater demand. So we don't know that technology change. We've seen a lot of interest and a lot of concern, a lot of development on just the chip itself, and whether we're at the peak chip world, whether now we're going to go into something that's more like wafers, and so that we might be able to do everything that a data center does in something the size of a laptop. And so those things are out there. And so when you're looking, and utilities make investments on 30-year cycles, so they need to know this is stranded investments and they need return on that. And so they're always a little hesitant to go out, we're going to have all this soaring demand, but we're always working. And if you look at the number of computations that these chips can do, there's been a 40% improvement in the energy efficiency of these chips just in the last several years. So that's also going against it. So you're seeing that improvement. There's a lot of pushback across the country in terms of what is that demand doing to our electric bill. There's a lot of miscommunication from that, because in many states where there's excess capacity, data centers can actually spread that load and lower electric bills for people by spreading it out and more efficiently using electric power generation. So there's a lot of mixed messages, and you have to be and that's where NEMA, we have to be at the forefront of owning that narrative, that discussion, and letting people see that and providing good information for people. And so that's our year ahead, looking ahead.
That is fascinating. It's such a topic we discuss all the time, but it's really interesting when you can look at it as a macro and look back, and then it's fascinating to see how all of this information is something that we can use to plan. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about yet that you're really passionate about that you want to share?
Well, I think the one thing, having been with this organization for such a long time, and it really was a standards development organization formed in the 1920s, and we're having our 100th anniversary next year. It went through that 50s manufacturing mentality and standards, and everything was in an analog world. And then just at the start of this century, it was more, you had to have a digital component to it. And it's evolved, and what we found out now is we're connected to so many other things. So now we're broadening our memberships. So we were pleased to have GM Energy join us. We haven't had the sector in because of electric vehicles. They're excited to be here. We have Cisco with us now because they're doing that low voltage energy transfer through the internet and the like. And so they realize, guess what? That has to be connected to the grid somewhere. And we have standards and there are fire protection codes related to that connection that ultimately goes to the grid. So we're expanding, and we're building a community that we never had here traditionally at NEMA, and new faces, new ideas, new perception, and they're working together to find solutions instead of working independently. And to me, that's an exciting aspect of NEMA that we're evolving very rapidly.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share all this super interesting stuff with us. And it's been such a pleasure to get to hear a lot of the conversations happening here at NEMA. And so I'm excited that we get to share some of those with people watching from home. But I can't thank you enough for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.